This is Atherton's Quay, or Fairclough Mill, or to give it its local nickname, the Pink Eye, for obvious reasons. It was originally built as a grain silo for a flour mill, and the flour mill was opened by a James Fairclough in 1831. Obviously this building wasn't built in 1831, it's made out of concrete, so it was probably built around the war or just after it. Mr. Fairclough wanted to jump on the back of all the trade that was happening going up and down the River Mersey. It would make it easy to get grain in and easy to get flour out, and it could go to Liverpool or it could go to Manchester. And in later years it could join onto the canal network. So it was quite clever of him, really. And it was so successful for him that he bought another mill at the side of the Mersey in a place called Howley. We've actually rode through there at the beginning of the first Mersey Cuts video. But we didn't stop because there's nothing to see there now. By 1980 the flour mill had closed and the silo was sold to a Mr. Phil Weston, who owned a local taxi company called Crown Cars. And he used to have the taxi office at the bottom of it, and on the top of the silo he had the taxi number. And I think he thought that he could draw attention to the taxi number by having a giant mural on the side of this concrete building. So he found a local artist called Anthony Turk, and commissioned him to do a mural on the side of the building. And Mr. Turk's idea was for a seascape in blue, with a whale and lots of fishes floating after it. But when they proposed it to the council rejected it. They said that such an elaborate mural would distract people on the traffic island opposite. So plan B was to do a giant eye. And he asked Mr. Weston what colour he would like the eye, and Mr. Weston said pink for some reason. And Mr. Turk started painting on what's called Walking Day in Warrington. That's the first Friday in July every year. And that's when the people of Warrington have a day off work and all the kids have a day off school. And they're supposed to march into town from all the different churches in Warrington. And then in the afternoon they have fairs on all the parks. It used to be a big deal in the 90s. Not so much now. Mr. Turk started painting on Walking Day, and it took him 13 days to do the pink eye. And luckily, in none of those 13 days did it rain, which is very odd for the northwest of England. And if it had rained, it would have been very difficult for him to finish the painting. And as a twist of the tale, the pink eye is definitely more distracting than a seascape would have been. And the same traffic island that the council thought people would be distracted on is now called the Pink Eye Roundabout. This is Quay, or to give it its original name, Bank Fields. Before the Industrial Revolution and the help of one man, there was no key here, so you couldn't call it Quay. No factories and pink eyes back then. It was a man named Thomas Patten who opened a copper smelting works here in Warrington at the banks of the Mersey that I suppose gives it its name, Quay. He'd been thinking about the best way to get the copper from the mines in Anglesey to here in Warrington. And he'd surmised that going down the River Mersey would be the best way. It wasn't without its pitfalls. The Mersey was tidal the whole stretch back then, and it's still tidal now at this part. And the boats would get stuck on sandbanks, and they could be stuck for up to 12 hours until the tide changed. And in some cases the boats would capsize because they were teetering on top of these sandbanks. So Mr. Thomas Patten commissioned some men to put some depth markers and some buoys to tell you the best route to take down the River Mersey, to avoid the shallow parts and take you through the deep parts. And he did that between Runcorn and Warrington. And it was so successful for his business that he was asked to help do that between Warrington and Manchester. And the company that started all that was called the Irwell and Mersey Navigation Company. So if you really think about it, Thomas Patten started off all the canals in this area. Certainly the Sankey Canal and the Bridgewater Canal, which was started up as competition to the Mersey and Irwell Navigation Company. The old Quay Canal that was dug between Latchford and Runcorn, that's as a direct result. Even Woolston New Cut from our first Mersey Cuts video comes from Thomas Patten building a copper smelting works here in 1697. So you may think that Thomas Patten is some kind of industrial hero, which in certain ways he is. But what did he sell from his copper smelting works? Yeah, pots and pans, as you would imagine. But his biggest export was something called black manillas. A black manilla is a black and copper bracelet that was highly prized in West Africa. And the merchants in Liverpool would buy thousands of these black manillas from all the different copper smelting works in the northwest. And with Thomas Patten's copper smelting works being at the banks of the River Mersey, I imagine he was the most handy to buy from. Those black manillas would be took to West Africa and used as currency to buy slaves. And in turn those slaves would be took over to America and forced to pick cotton. And the cotton they picked would be put back on boats and brought back over to Liverpool to come back down the Mersey, past Thomas Patten's copper smelting works, and into the centre of Manchester, or Cottonopolis as it was known at the time. So Thomas Patten's idea to make the River Mersey navigable puts him at one of the corners of the slave triangle. When Thomas Patten died, his business and all his wealth was given over to Thomas Patten Jr. And Thomas Patten Jr. built himself a grand house in Warrington town centre called Bank Hall, which we now use as Warrington's Town Hall. And in fact, Bank Hall is actually built on top of blocks of copper slag that they use as the foundations of the building. If you go into the cellar of the Town Hall, you can see this copper slag. So if you really have a think about it, Warrington Town Hall's built on the slave trade as well.
They told you the news. Kept so cold in the blackest tide. If only you knew. I've heard what they've said, ignored what I read, and look to the bright side. So here's to the bad times, forgotten in good lives. I won't let you down. I'll take off my shoes and dance to the good news. Broken smiles, no, they won't turn it round. So take off your shoes and dance to the good news. Left too long in the passing time. You know what you know to be true. Dim lit scenes of a better life. Spoken in loud tones to you.
I bet you thought I was trespassing on that chemical works property, but I was well within my rights. As long as you stick to the green line, you can walk through the chemical works, because it brings you to this, the Warrington Transporter Bridge. More about that in a second. What was the chemical works? Well, as of 2020, it was the place that they made washing powder. In fact, it made Daz Bold and Persil washing powder. But because you prefer the liquid and the tabs, they stopped making the washing powder and the factory's now closed. They just really have to keep it ticking over because it's still full of loads of dangerous chemicals. They're working on dismantling it. The first soap works was opened here in 1814 by a Joseph Crossfield. He was only 21 at the time, and he borrowed £1,500 off his dad. And he took over an old iron foundry and started making soap. He'd done an apprenticeship in chemistry and he'd figured out how you made soap. The soap was made from tallow, which is beef fat, so effectively it's made out of beef dripping. And that was mixed with palm oil from exotic places around the world, all brought down the Mersey. With that you needed to make an alkali to mix it all together with. And that was made out of seaweed that they got from Scotland and Ireland. And they burnt it. And they mixed that with lime from North Wales. And a little bit of salt from the Cheshire Salt Flats. And all those materials came down the River Mersey here to Warrington. Mr. Crossfield was very successful in making his soap. Soap was big business at the time. As of the 1830s, he was making 900 tonnes of soap a year. Business was going so well that it caught the attention of two brothers called the Lever Brothers. And they decided that they were also going to make a soap works. And because they were cheeky, they built it right next door to Crossfield Soap Works. And the two factories worked separately, but side by side for many years, up until 1926, when the Lever Brothers bought Joseph Crossfield Soap Works. And they made a company called Unilever. And if you look on the back of the bottle of detergent that you've got, it most probably says Unilever on the back even to this day. But what about this transporter bridge? It was built in 1916 and it was designed to take railway locomotives over the River Mersey. But why not just make a normal bridge or viaduct? Well, that was because of those Mersey flats. The same reason that they had to build the Sankey viaduct so high is the reason why they had to build a transporter bridge here in Warrington. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough room to have a run-up for the locomotives to get to a high-level viaduct. So they decided to make a transporter bridge. And it was one of 3 transporter bridges on the River Mersey. There was the Warrington Transporter Bridge, another transporter bridge a few hundred yards down the river, and a transporter bridge that went over the River Mersey and over the Manchester Ship Canal, over in Widnes and Runcorn. There are now only 4 transporter bridges left in the UK. That would be the Royal Victoria Transporter Bridge in London, which is the newest of all the transporter bridges. That was built in 1998. There'd be the Warrington Transporter Bridge, built in 1916, the Newport Transporter Bridge in Wales, and the Middlesbrough Transporter Bridge over in Middlesbrough. The Warrington Transporter Bridge was designed by a William Henry Hunter, and it was made by a company that is the Beatles of bridge builders. So William Arrol & Co. They're renowned for making the UK's most famous bridges. The Forth Bridge in 1890 and the Forth Road Bridge in 1964. The Queen's Ferry Bridge over near Chester in 1927. How about the Severn Bridge in 1966? Or the Humber Bridge in 1981? Or the most elaborate one, Tower Bridge in 1894. And oddly, they made this little tiny transporter bridge at the back of a chemical works in Warrington. It was originally designed to take 18-ton locomotives over the River Mersey, filled up with all the things that they needed for the chemical works. But in 1940 they converted it to road vehicles, and in 1954 they upped the tonnage to 30 tons. I'm not sure how many tons it could take today. It's in a little bit of a state and it's a bit rusty. But it's a Grade 2 listed building, and in fact it's classed as a scheduled ancient monument. But hopefully when they knock down all this chemical works and they inevitably build a load of flats here, maybe the transporter bridge will be the centrepiece of a new housing estate. Warrington's own Salford Quays, or Bankies.